Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary wasn't just a jail. For decades, it was a coal mine for the state of Tennessee that originated in the wake of a bloody labor battle known as the Coal Creek War. By 1896, inmates were building an on-site railroad spur as well as the original wooden prison structure with their own bare hands, and the gates of hell were opened. There never was a death row at Brushy, but there was plenty of death. By 1931, Brushy housed 976 men, roughly 300 more than its capacity. Overcrowding was so prevalent and persistent, it drew comparisons to conditions inside the infamous Siberian prisons of the Soviet Union. The state's answer was simple. Plans were drawn for a new structure to be made of reinforced concrete, and they made convicts break sandstone out of the nearby quarry to build the prison. Constructed in the shape of a Greek cross, it stood 4 stories high, boasted battlements atop, and by 1934 was surrounded by an 18-foot stone wall. For a moment, things got better. The new prison was more safe, more sanitary, and built in the shape of a cross, offering inmates a narrow path to redemption. By the middle of the century, Brushy's reputation as the last stop for the worst criminals became legend. If you wore out your welcome at another prison or committed some unspeakable crimes, you ended up at Brushy, and that was never a good thing. In 1957, after finally shutting down the hole, they built D Block to keep the worst inmates isolated from the rest. It just so happens that the D Block was built on the site of the old death house, where the bodies of dead inmates were kept until they were given back to families or buried at the pauper cemetery up on a hill at the prison. James Earl Ray wasn't the meanest one to ever walk down these halls and sleep behind the bars, not by a long shot, but his is a name that echoes across Brushy's long history. Even before he confessed to the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1969, Ray's life seemed to be bent the wrong way. He was always a thief, a fraud, a criminal. In 1977, Ray and 6 others climbed over the wall using a 16-foot ladder made of salvaged pipe. The FBI and U.S. Marshal Office swarmed into Morgan County, but a little more than 2 days later, local trackers and hound dogs found him exhausted and buried under leaves trying to mask his scent. He had only made it 8.5 miles from the prison walls. Ray left Brushy in 1992 and died at the state facility in Nashville 6 years later. Brushy saw its share of evil men in the 113 years it operated, and Paul Dennis Reed was as evil as any of them. Reed was 20 years old when he was convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to 20 years in Texas. After serving 7 years, Reed was paroled, and he set his sights on Nashville with dreams of becoming a country music star. He ended up washing dishes at Shoney's, where he was fired for throwing a plate at another employee. The day after losing his job, February of 1997, Reed went to a Captain D's that was down the road from his job. He forced a 16-year-old employee and her 25-year-old manager into the cooler. He shot them both and stole money from the register. The next month, he killed 3 more at a McDonald's just 3 miles from the Captain D's. The month after that, he drove an hour up the road from Nashville to Clarksville, where he kidnapped and cut the throats of a 21-year-old and a 16-year-old that worked at a Baskin-Robbins. He left their bodies in Dunbar Cave, a popular state park. The fast food killer, as they called him, was convicted of all 7 murders and given 7 death sentences, the most ever handed down in a single case in Tennessee. He ended up at Brushy, then moved to Morgan County Correctional Complex when Brushy closed. Paul Dennis Reed died in 2013 from pneumonia. When Brushy opened in 1896, the hole housed disobedient and dangerous inmates for days, weeks, even months at a time, if the warden deemed it right. It was 4 feet by 8 feet by 10 feet long. It was a hell of a place to be.